Okay, the first thing we're going to discuss is cross-window messaging and what it is and how it works and how we can exploit it. Cross-window messaging is a new API and feature of HTML5. It's usually through the post message API. Enables us to send messages to another origin, so another web page which is not our own website. Before this API, this was not supported on browsers, and we couldn't send a message from one website to another because same origin policy would prevent us from doing any of that. Only the same domain could communicate with itself. You could not communicate across domains or across origins, or if you're directly accessing IPs across IPs. So this new API, the cross-window messaging API, enables us to send messages across multiple domains, and it can be used using headers. So under SOAP, it was only possible to send messages if both of the windows were under the exact same protocol port and host, which would create the host name. So https example.com :81. They both have had to use that address to be able to communicate with each other, and that wasn't very desirable. So the new API adds the method to every window, so it's part of the window object on the browser that allows you to send textual messages from the current window to any other window or tab to another tab. It can be a child-parent relationship or other relationships if you have the IDs of those. This has nothing to do with the cross-domain policies that might exist in there, so it's a separate thing. The cross-domain policies that restrict stuff do not restrict the cross-window messaging. From an attacker's perspective and from a penetration tester's perspective, there are multiple ways to use this feature and turn it into a vulnerability and exploit it. Obviously, this is a client-based vulnerability. It's based on the header that the web application sends, and then the client becomes vulnerable. Though it means that it's not a server vulnerability, and we cannot exploit servers using it, but we can generally exploit clients with it. There are different attack vectors. There are different things we can do on cross-window messaging, and if there's a vulnerability in a website with regards to cross-window messaging, and a lot of non-famous websites do have these vulnerabilities, especially if the server targets their origin with a wildcard, which is a star. An intended recipient can receive the message from the sender. So if the origin is allowed to be anything, then an attacker can receive the messages and communicate with an attacker-controlled server instead of the server that was intended by the application itself. And then if this message is sensitive, such as a session handler or something like that, then the attacker can get full control. We can also receive the message. If this receiver of the message does not know who the sender is and does not verify that, then an attacker can exploit this by faking a message, by sending a message that's not from the origin to that target. So because these are generally inside clients and applications on the client side using JavaScript, such checks are not as strictly enforced as web servers. And typically, just like what I said, validation is very important. Without this validation, the cross-site scripting can also happen. If the messages that are passed along to different windows are not validated properly and then are used directly inside JavaScript, then XSS vulnerabilities become possible. And it's actually pretty easy and straightforward to do an XSS over cross-window messaging. You just have to create a page that sends a message to the vulnerable page, and the vulnerable page just has to run that piece of code as JavaScript. So that would result in an XSS happening on the target. So the receiver should not trust the message that's coming to it and verify what's it getting, and make sure that it's in the type and in the other parameters that it expects to receive. So let's see an example of incorrect validation. This is the receiving window of the cross-window messaging. You can see that it adds an event listener that listens for a new message. If the new one is not from localhost, which is the same origin, then it just passes. So there's a validation on the origin. But after that, if that origin pass is successful, then it just sets some inner HTML to the data that we receive, which is pretty much like running that or adding whatever it sends to the page. So if in the sender page we just send a message, nothing will happen. But if we send some script tag and include some JavaScript code in it, then the second page, the receiving page, is gonna add it to its own and run it as some JavaScript. It can obviously be other things such as image tags and iframes, but obviously the JavaScript is the most dangerous one. And even if it sort of validates and makes sure there are no JavaScripts in there, it can still be used for other malicious purposes such as adding content to the page, clickbaiting, and all the other attacks that we covered in the XSS chapter. So this is how cross-window messaging generally works, and how an improper validation and a wide set of origins can result in different types of vulnerabilities and different exploits, the most likely one of which is an XSS vulnerability.